Today I'm going to look at my 3 most common lens setup for landscape photography on my Nikon camera system. So looking back over my channel, a little over a year ago, I actually did a video very similar to this, and I'll link to it down in the description below. And while that lens setup worked out pretty well for me, over the course of the past year, both my tastes have evolved and how I want my photography to look and how I compose things, as well as just acquiring a few more lenses for my landscape photography. So now what I carry today is different than what I used to carry about a year ago. So today I'll talk a little bit about those old recommendations, just real quickly touch on what 3 lenses I used to carry and how my setup has evolved and what my current favorite 3 lenses are for my landscape photography. So in my last video, here's the 3 lenses I used to carry. I used to carry this Nikon 14-30, and this was a great lens. Very happy with this setup in my pack. Made a great wide-angle lens, nice and light, and it was one of the lenses I recommended. Next up was the 24-70, the Nikon 24-70. It is came with some of the kits if you got a Z6 or a Z5 or anything like that. A pretty common lens. It is an S-series lens, 24-70 f4. Great lens, nice image quality. Definitely one of my favorites. And this used to be in my kit. And then the third lens to tie everything all together was at the time a Nikon 24-200 f4 to f6.3, so a variable aperture lens, and it covers a huge focal length range, 24-200. Now, some of the cons to this is, one, as time evolved, the 200 wasn't quite enough reach, so I felt a little limited in the 200mm focal length, and 2, I had a lot of overlap between the 24-70 and the 24-200. Obviously, this whole lens is overlapped by this 24-200. Why did I do that? Well, I always felt like the image quality in the 24-70 was just a little bit sharper, a little bit better. So if I was shooting in that focal length range, I tended to toss this one on, the 24-70, just so I had that little bit of extra IQ. Now, that's not to say that the 24-200 was bad. This is a great lens, great all-around lens, but with all this overlap, it starts to add up and weigh, and I was really, at the end of the day, only covering from 14mm to 200mm. So, like I said, when I was carrying this, this was great. It was very budget friendly. You could actually drop the 24-70 out of here and have pretty much the same focal length range between your 14-30 and 24-200. If you're new to landscape photography and trying to build those lenses up, this could be a very powerful combination. Get the same focal length I had in 2 lenses, keep that weight down. Like I said, the 24-200 is a great low lens. I've done some reviews on it. I'll link those in the description. But that used to be my carry. But as time has gone on, my tastes have evolved and I've switched. Okay, so let's talk about what my standard carry is now. So we'll go through each one of these lenses and I'll talk a little bit about it. And let's start with the wide angle side first, and that is still the Nikon 14-30. I love this lens. It's great. It's a 14-30 f4. Doesn't weigh a whole lot. It doesn't get big and bulky. It's an 82mm filter thread on here, so the filters can be nice and small. Doesn't add a lot of room and space consumption into the pack. So really happy with this lens. I can't recommend this one highly enough, and it still serves me great on the wide angle side. So I don't really see any desire to move away from this lens. It just fits what I do for image quality and size and pack and weight, just really great. So super happy with this lens, and this is where we start with on the wide angle side of things. So for the next one, let's skip over the telephoto lens I chose to get increased focal length, and then it helps play into what I've chosen for my middle lens. So let's dive into that. So what I've got here is, this is a Sigma 100-400, and it took me a little bit to get used to this, and one of the reasons I went for this is my photography style started to change. I started to get more into smaller scenes, whether it be just within the forests and within some of the waterfalls and the caves I visited, to some of my travels to the Rocky Mountain National Park or Death Valley or anything like that. I wanted that longer focal length to sort of hone in on certain elements of the grander scene. And I've really come to enjoy that. I feel like, and I've talked about it before, I feel like that's sort of a natural evolution of a landscape photographer. When you first get started, it's wide angle and you get these grand vistas. And over time, as you get more and more used to areas and you start being more in tune with nature, you start to want to pick out details. That's where the 100-400 really comes in. And it took me a little bit to get used to this lens. When I first bought it, I was like, oh, I don't know. I wouldn't take it out with me. I was like, oh, or I actually did a video where I only took this lens once just to sort of force myself to learn to see in this focal length. And that was very valuable. I'll link to that video down below as well. But I've really become a big fan of this 100-400, and it's almost always in my pack unless I'm really conscious of weight or some other outside factor where I might not want to carry it because of size and weight. So like I said, this is a Sigma version. It is actually an F mount. I don't have the adapter on here right now, but I do need to use it with the Nikon FTZ adapter. It is a variable aperture lens, f5 to f6.3, which is fine. We'll talk about apertures in a little bit, but the lens is done well. Very happy with the image quality, and it works out really well for me. But really, the obvious question is why the Sigma instead of the Nikon 100 to 400? And really, you know, I keep wanting a Nikon 100 to 400, but I have a very difficult time justifying the purchase. This lens is, I think, sits around the $700-ish range, maybe $800, not on sale. Relatively inexpensive lens for what you get. Great image quality versus the Nikon 100 to 400, which sits around the $2,700 range. So there's a huge difference in price. So when I was picking out a lens and buying the lens, in my head, I was just like, that's a lot of travel and a lot of trips I can take. And from what I read, the Sigma image quality is pretty good. I've been happy with it since I've had it. And all that extra money, sort of things that help to fund trips to Rocky Mountains, Death Valley, and to me, some of the bigger improvements, it's not always about the camera gear that makes you a better photographer. It's getting out there and experiencing nature and seeing locations. So that huge price difference essentially freed up $2,000 in cash to go do some travels and actually get more practice for my landscape photography and a bigger variety of images and facilitate some travel. Now, I still think about, but boy, it'd be nice to have all Z mounts all the way across. And so even in prep for this video, I was like, you know, what about weight? Maybe the Nikon 100-400 weighs less. So I did weight calculations of all my lenses and camera bodies, and really this Sigma, even with the FTZ adapter, is still just a little lighter than the Nikon 100-400, so I can't even justify it on, well, it lightened my load and it's worth the extra money. So I'm not going to say I'm never going to get the Nikon 100-400. I have not come up with a reason that completely justifies it yet, and especially when the Sigma 100-400 serves me pretty well. But this is my telephoto lens, and so like I said, now we've covered 14 to 30 on the wide side, 100 to 400 on the telephoto side, and real happy with this lens. So then that brings us to the middle lens. What am I using in that middle gap? In my previous setup, it was sort of the 2470 was the middle gap, but the 24-200 could fill it as well. So what did I go with? Well, up until recently, I was using the 2470 to fill that gap. This guy right here. Like I said, great image quality, so I tended to go with this. So that would put me at a 14 to 30, 2470, and then I had to jump to the 100 to 400. And while I don't know how often I felt like that gap in focal length actually affected one of my compositions, or if I was ever actually out in the field going, I really wish I could get 85 millimeters on this shot, and didn't have that capability. But in my head, I was like, wow, how nice would it be to be able to go out and know I have from 14 to 400 covered in the field all the time when I go out with my standard carry. I just felt like that'd make me very well prepared. So I eventually swapped out the 24 to 70 and went with the 24 to 120, which is an f4 lens as well, and very well reviewed. The image quality is good. I will do a review, in the field review on this lens in the future. I just want to get a little bit more time in on it. I've had it out for several trips now, West Virginia, multiple Hocking Hills trips, things like that, and I've been impressed with the lens, and I do sort of like the extra reach. But one of the things I think it really fits into my lens choice well is I now have 14 to 30 covered, 24 to 120, and 100 to 400. And with all three of those lenses, I feel like I'm very well prepared when I'm out there, and that I will never really be in a situation that I can't cover. So this has been my standard carry now for a little over 2 months. I've been very happy with it. I have a couple little swaps I'll do if I'm not gonna go out with my normal carry, and that could be anything like I'm doing a super long hike or super steep hikes or anything where I wanna lighten my load or reduce the size of lenses in my pack or reduce the size of my setup. I'll cover that in another video, some of the swaps I do and some of the other combinations I'll take out and when and why I use them. But for now, this is my common carry. I've evolved this because I've acquired more lenses, which gives me more options to choose what I want to take, as well as my photography style sort of slowly moving, as I think any landscape photographer does, as I've mentioned, sort of going from those wide, grand scenes into more of those smaller details where those telephotos really start to come in handy on a more regular basis. So those are my lens choices these days, but let's just talk about two things that people are probably wondering about. First of which is prime lenses. Why don't I carry a prime lens? And really it's because I just feel like for landscape photography, a prime lens is somewhat restrictive. They can be a good way to get some really fast glass and very high image quality, but you're locked into that focal length. And as a landscape photographer, unlike the portrait world where a lot of times you hear zoom with your feet, which is more relevant, in the landscape photography world, you might be right on the cusp of a waterfall or right on the cusp of a cliff, and you can't zoom with your feet. You need to get that zoom with your lens. So because of that, I just feel limited. And to cover enough focal lengths, I feel like you would start to carry a full bag of various prime lenses and things like that in order to really, this 24-120 covers a pretty significant focal length range with very little hit to image quality or anything like that. I think the zoom lenses work really well, and it gives me the flexibility and versatility I like. Like I said, with this setup, I'm able to go from 14 millimeters to 400 millimeters between 3 lenses, and I sort of like that setup, and it's great. So for me, prime lenses just don't make a lot of sense for landscape photography. And next up, you'll see I have nothing faster than an f4 lens. So for example, my 14-30 is an f4 lens, not a 2.8. My 24-120, f4. And my 100-400 is actually a variable aperture from f5 to f6.3. So I don't have any really fast lenses I use for landscape photography. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is really most of my aperture settings are usually f8 to f11, maybe up to f16. So I'm almost never shooting super fast. I'm never shooting below f4. So those f2.8s for the landscape photography I do don't really bring me a lot of value. On top of that, these f4 lenses tend to be a little lighter and fit in the pack a little easier, and I don't have to carry as much weight around. So by going with the f4s and the variable aperture lenses, I'm able to have some space savings, have some weight savings, and still have nice sharp images that I want in the focal length ranges I'm using. Because I'm a landscape photographer and I'm an f8, f11 anyways, I'm going to be tending to shoot from a tripod to be able to have those slower shutter speeds to keep my ISO down. So I don't really feel like the f2.8 lenses bring me and my landscape photography a lot of value. Now with that said, I have 2.8 lenses. I do other types of photography outside of landscape photography, and I have 2.8 lenses for those. Things like portraits or headshots and things like that. I have them. So it's not that I don't have access to them, it's just they weigh so much and are so big. I don't like to put them in the pack and take them because I don't feel like they bring me value out in the field. Now, one caveat to this is I said my landscape photography, and my landscape photography does not include any astro. I have actually never gone out and shot astro beyond maybe a picture of the moon when it's one of the eclipses, and then it's on this lens, and I'm not that great at it, and it's just not something I do a lot of. If I move to astrophotography, then that faster lens becomes more important, getting down to the f2.8 or faster lens. Then I would consider maybe, if I was doing enough of it, swapping one of these into a 2.8 just so I had that capability with me all the time. Or more likely, it is a case where I'd actually get a prime lens that was nice and wide and fast, and have one lens that still didn't take up a ton of weight and a ton of room, but still gave me the faster lens for astrophotography and the focal length that I would probably tend to find more common. So that is a situation, if you're doing a lot of astrophotography, you probably would want to figure out how you're going to add in a faster lens. Who knows, maybe in a year or two I'll be a huge astrophotography fan and I'll have some other setup. So bear in mind, my landscape photography is outdoors, early mornings, evenings. I'm not doing astro, so not having those faster lenses doesn't really impact my photography. So those are the 3 lenses I use. As you can see, this video is focused on Nikon lenses and focal lengths that are available to the Nikon camera system. But if you're a Canon shooter, Sony shooter, or whatever, it's pretty easy to translate these because it essentially breaks down to a wide-angle lens, a standard zoom lens, and a telephoto lens. So within your camera system, that's sort of where I go. So even if you're not a Nikon shooter, you can probably take some of the information in this video and sort of apply it to your camera system and get into the ballpark of what a great set of lenses for your landscape photography would be. So like I said, I'm pretty happy with this setup. Who knows, maybe in a year I'll be doing another video about how it changed and what I'm shooting now. But for now, I'm really happy with this setup, and I hope this video helps. If it does, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me, including tips, tricks, behind the scenes, mini gear reviews, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any landscape photography content from me. And thank you for watching.